And Omar Noureldin, the Vice President of the Muslim Public Affairs Council. Gentlemen, welcome to you both. Omar, if I could start with you. The President's retweeting of these anti-Muslim videos is being held up by some as proof of his anti-Muslim stance, as proof of Islamophobia. What's your read of what happened?
Well, I think what's different today is that in previous policies and statements that the President made, there was always some sort of pretext for the reason, whether it's national security or immigration or our Christian ideals as a nation. Here, there was no pretext. There was a retweet of anti-Muslim propaganda that was put out there by a virulent anti-Muslim group in the UK. So here, there's no pretext. This is really the President's genuinely held beliefs for the world to see without any couching.
To those who say maybe he didn't know what the group was about, does that matter to you?
I don't think, I mean, when you're the President of the United States, you're held to a higher standard. And to say that he didn't know what the group was about or what these videos was about, the guy knows what he's doing. And this is part of a deliberate tactic against Muslims, against immigrants, against African Americans, against the LGBT community. What the President is trying to do is sow fear, fear-monger, and create divisions in the country.
Dominic, to bring you in, the group behind these images, the far-right, Britain First bunch, if you will, they spout a kind of religious nationalism. Where does that come from? What is it born out of?
Well, the group itself is an outgrowth of the BNP, the British National Party, a far-right extremist nationalist party. We could argue a nativist party in the language of today. But essentially, its goals are to harass Muslims, to spread false news about the ways in which Britain is moving towards Sharia law and so on, and as they themselves claim, to restore Christianity to the United Kingdom. So it's this construct of a kind of unbroken tradition, a religious tradition linked to whiteness, linked to national identity, that unfortunately has a history, but has also gained currency in recent years.
The irony I find in having a religious nationalism of returning it to Christian ideals, bearing in mind the UK is fiercely secular, right? So, I mean, in complete contrast to the US, religion doesn't really hold that much currency in that country.
Right, but it's proved to be, and these videos have proved to be, obviously highly divisive tools. And I think what's interesting about them is that when one, first of all, when one retweets, one endorses. That's an issue. Secondly, when one retweets things that one has found some kind of satisfaction, provocation, and so on. And the big question would be, what is it about those particular videos, these sort of horrendous representations, propagandist representations of Muslims, that appeals to Donald Trump's perception of Muslims? And this is not the first time that this has happened. This cannot be construed as a kind of innocent retweet. This is to be inscribed in a much longer history of Islamophobic statements, racist statements, and so on, some of which also took place in the context of the UK, where he found and took upon himself to insult the Mayor of London, who happens to be a Muslim and an ethnic minority.
Well, I want to bring Omar back in because the reaction in the UK was swift. Politicians from across the aisle of all stripes were swift, and they condemned the President's actions, including, obviously, the Prime Minister's office, as we know, and the Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson. Let's put up his tweet and what he put out. He said, "Britain First is a divisive, hateful group whose views are not in line with our values. UK has a proud history as an open, tolerant society, and hate speech has no place here." As we've made the point, the President doubled down, tweeting back at Theresa May. Just to remind our viewers, this is what he said: "Theresa May, don't focus on me. Focus on the destructive radical Islamic terrorism that is taking place within the United Kingdom. We are doing just fine." Omar, what is the end game here? So, I mean, okay, he's framing Islam as this encroaching threat, this danger, supposedly to wipe out Western civilization. What is his end game other than separating communities? Where does it go? Where does it end up?
Before I get to that, I just want to say it's a sad day when you have both the British Prime Minister, who's head of the Conservative Party, and the opposition leader, head of the Labour Party, both equally condemning the President of the United States while he's being praised by a former Ku Klux Klan leader. That's a sad day for America. But to answer your question, the end game is to wage an ideological war between the West and Islam. This is something that Stephen Bannon had, when he was part of the Trump administration, said plainly. He said it before he was part of the administration, he said it afterwards. And the idea is that they want to frame this as a kind of existential threat to the United States, to what they believe the United States is as a Christian nation. Because when you look at the actual numbers, Muslims are less 1% of the United States. There is no credible existential threat here.
Dominic, what does this kind of attention to Britain First mean for this group and for these ideas in Europe, this kind of nationalism, this kind of retreating, if you will?
Well, as we know, and elections have reflected the ways in which so many of these views have been mainstreamed in the past year, whether it's the Dutch elections, the German elections, the French elections. And so it is extraordinarily dangerous to engage in this kind of polemic, which is essentially the oxygen upon which these far-right, populist, extremist, nativist, radical groups, whatever it is that we're going to call it, feed. And Donald Trump's speech in Poland very much echoed what Omar just mentioned, this sort of civilizationalist conflict that is at stake. And it's extremely difficult then for Europe in general, that is trying to reaffirm its commitment to liberal democratic values, to come up against this leader who is, of course, an important Atlantic partner for Theresa May, and to be focusing on these kinds of questions that reap sort of divisiveness in these societies.
Omar, to give you the last word, you referenced David Duke, the former KKK leader. I want to put up the tweet. He posted after the president took his course of action, putting out these anti-Muslim images. He says, Trump retweets videos of crippled white kid in Europe being beaten by migrants and white people being thrown off a roof and then beaten to death. He's condemned for showing us what the fake news media won't. Thank God for Trump. That's why we love him. Yes, well, the videos, we can go into it and how, you know, we've done the research and they're not what they claim to be. At least it's not the full story. First of all, the issue of the crutches and in the Netherlands, that wasn't a migrant. He was born in the Netherlands. And we don't know enough about the other two. But be that as it may, let me just ask you this, Omar. What are the real world consequences here in the United States of the president's words, his actions?
Well, words matter. The president has a hugely important symbolic power, the bully pulpit of the White House. And the FBI data that was released just a few weeks ago on hate crimes in 2016, the largest single increase percentage-wise was hate crimes against Muslims, a 19% increase from 2015 to 2016. So words do have consequences. We saw Dianne Feinstein, ranking member of Senate Judiciary, link this rhetoric to the hate crimes data. So it's no longer something that's just pie in the sky type stuff.
It's quite the day when, again, David Duke is praising you and this country's closest allies are shaking their head in disbelief. Dominic Thomas, Omar Noureldin, thank you so much for the conversation, an important one. Thank you.